opportunity for a lot of people to learn. Our speaker here, I'm going to get out of the way and let our speaker talk. His name is David Shacochis. He's a VP with CenturyLink Cloud. CenturyLink is a telephony company, but they also are a cloud foundry company, and they do a lot of other things involved with cloud computing, and we'll let David tell the story.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thank you. That's always an ominous introduction. So I got married many years ago, but on one of my first anniversaries with the wife, I went golfing in Scotland, or at least we went to Scotland. She didn't think of it as golfing in Scotland. And the last day there, we were staying at a nice old manor house, and there was a golf course attached. And I said, well, can I take this opportunity? I'm going to take a morning, I'm going to go out and I'm going to hit the links. When am I going to have a chance to golf in Scotland again? So we squared that all away, and off I go. And I didn't have any gear with me, didn't have my clubs, just rented the kit. And it was one of these old courses where it comes with a caddy. So I had a Scottish caddy coming with me all day long. And we're walking around, and I walk up to the first tee. He just sort of hands me the club, doesn't say anything. Real quiet guy. I go into my first swing, and I'm a new golfer at this point, right? So I just wanted to take the opportunity to go golfing in Scotland. My first tee shot, big slice off to the left into the lock. Ended up carding some terrible score, moving on, but I'm just enjoying the day. I'm not going to let it get me down. Second swing, yanks it way off to the right. And this is basically how it goes all day. All day long, the caddy says nothing. Just hands me the club, watches my terrible shots, walks around, follows me all around, but I paid my money. I got my caddy. End of the day, I finally get one good shot on an approach, and I'm standing over a putt that actually have a chance to make a par. And my caddy who said nothing all day, and I'm just sort of talking to myself at this point, and I say, if I don't hit this putt, I'm going to go drown myself in the lock. And he says, as I'm about to, in my backswing, I doubt you could keep your head still that long. So we all like to tell stories, and I'm here to talk to you about stories. The kind of stories we tell each other, like social stories, or like that Scottish golf story that didn't go over so well. The kind of stories we tell inside of IT. And some of the specific stories we see different versions of, writ large, playing out across the entire industry today. So first I'll tell a little bit about my story, and this is the real story. I work at CenturyLink. CenturyLink is a large telecommunications and communications company. We have one of the largest pools of IT infrastructure on the planet. We have it rolled out across 50-plus data centers around the world. We have 250,000 route miles of fiber. And we have massive IT infrastructure investment inside of all that, inside of those data centers and across that network. The customers can slice up into subscription services of various shapes and sizes. So I work in our cloud platform division, where our mission is to automate the delivery of as much of that as possible. So it keeps me busy. I particularly focus on what we call our cloud ecosystem program, which is what we use to go and integrate with other partners. So other partner technologies can interoperate with the CenturyLink platform. And that's my team's job that does that. We're sort of more of a partner-oriented, but a technical partner-oriented organization. I'm also the host of a podcast on the CenturyLink network called the Hybrid IT Files, and it's pretty easy to find if you search for Hybrid IT Files and CenturyLink. But the story I wanted to focus on, and the story I wanted to start with, is probably one of the oldest stories in the book. It's the story that sort of underpins just about everything we're doing. It's the communication gap between the business and IT. It's existed for decades, and it's basically what gets everybody up in the morning, and it's basically what a lot of us work on a day-in, day-out basis. Whether you're in IT, whether you're in the business, whether you're in a vendor or a service provider community, this is the gap that you're trying to close. And there's been a lot of people, I'm sure, in this room that have either sat at their desk or at the edge of a hotel bed somewhere, staring off blankly into space, like Bill Murray is here, wondering why your challenges are getting lost in translation. It's more important than ever to close this gap. Technology is changing, and software communities are changing. It was a time where enterprise IT could just make some ISV purchases, write some integration code, and that was basically all you needed. Now, with this explosion of use cases, and the panel talked a lot about them, brought on by what we call in the communications sector the gigabit economy, how much you can move through the network, how much you can move between devices, how much you can drive out to edge user computing devices, how much decision science is now part of the domain of IT, how much sensor telemetry is flowing through IT. all of that is turning into, and this phrase has been used before, every company is a software company. So a company's ability to produce good software, not just the integration code that gets System A talking to System B anymore, but actually becoming a software enterprise, is on a lot of CIOs' minds. It's on a lot of organization and business minds. So companies are really turning towards agile development to get this done. And over the past several years, they've been using agile to try and draw this relationship a little bit more closely together. I was reading, there's a study that's done every year by Analysis.net Research. It's sponsored by Version 1. And I've never seen a stat like this. In the 2014 State of Agile survey that was released, they surveyed about 4,000 companies. And of 4,000 companies, 94% of companies said that they practice agile. It seems hard to believe that 94% of all the companies are fully agile, but they all say that they're practicing. So I guess if you're practicing, you're getting better, and that's probably the state that a lot of them are addressing. And they're looking at things because everything's moving fast. Right? The industries are moving fast underneath them. The competitive landscapes are shifting. And agile software development practices are centered on concepts like progressive refinement and minimum viable product and defining requirements in terms of user stories and developing one user story at a time and collating them all together into a backlog and issuing progressive releases against your minimum viable product. And so stories are great. As with most things that sound simple, there's some simplicity and there's some truth to that simplicity. User stories are a great way of defining those design requirements. Right? They define the who and the what and the why of a requirement, and they let our engineering and development teams go out and worry about the how. So why does this work so well? Why are user stories basically one of the underpinning requirement models for agile software development, which is driving so much development in the industry? Well, first off, it doesn't always work so well. Of those 94% that say they are practicing agile, that they're implementing agile in some form or fashion, version 1 found that even with that 94% number, less than half of teams are even operating in that model. So the real number behind the 94% number is that, yeah, we're all doing it, but we're just doing it some of the way. Some of our teams are working in that model. It takes time to transition to this model of telling stories to define IT requirements and closing the gap by telling stories to one another. Storytelling and the transition to storytelling can be awkward. Right? In that same State of Agile survey, the leading cause of failed Agile projects was a company culture that ran counter to the storytelling dynamics of Agile development. But storytelling, when done right, connecting a full narrative of user stories together into a cohesive system architecture, can produce tremendous enterprise value. And this is where we're seeing the real innovation in the industry. Epics of stories connected together with a common narrative that gets a team full of people working towards a common goal. It allows software to generate these tremendous value and change industry landscapes. And a lot of that comes from this collaborative power of storytelling. So why do we tell stories? Why did I tell that story about me golfing poorly? I may ask myself that tonight. Well, there's an author named Christopher Booker who about 10 years ago wrote a book called The 7 Basic Plots, Why We Tell Stories. It was basically his life's work. It took him 30-plus years to write, and he's an author, he's a literary analyst. It's a very apropos name for somebody who's an author and who does nothing but read and write all day, Christopher Booker. But his life's work was basically stems from his analysis that, you see these patterns of storytelling emerging year after year and epoch after epoch. You see all these story patterns, and so many different stories and narratives have the same structure. And there's commonalities between them. And he opens up the book by saying, look, I'm not the first person that's noticed this, that there's a couple of common recurring plots that you see throughout all of literature. But what he tries to do is get into the heart of it and analyze it. So in the first half of the book, he says, look, there are basically 7 basic plots that most stories boil down to. And he draws the distinction, and he gives evidence that shows some of these go back to caveman paintings and ancient stories, stretching all the way up to summer popcorn flicks in the modern 21st century. They're fundamentally the same set of 7 stories. So it's an interesting theory, but in the second half of the book, he starts to delve into a little bit of the reasons why. So the 7 basic plots that he thinks, I thought I'd share them with everybody here today. In case you were wondering, I shouldn't have the headline up there and not give you the 7 stories. The first one is overcoming the monster. The protagonist sets out to defeat some sort of antagonistic force, probably usually somewhere a little bit far away, but it threatens the protagonist or their community or their homeland in some way. Second one is rags to riches. The disadvantaged protagonist somehow acquires things like power or wealth or a mate, loses it all, but then gains it back again, elevates their station, changes their stars. The rags to riches story. The quest story. The protagonist, and usually a group of companions, are setting out to acquire some sort of object or to get to a location. They face lots of obstacles and challenges along the way. Then there's the voyage and return, where the protagonist goes to a strange land, overcomes a set of threats, and then returns with nothing but experience. Everyone's favorite, the comedy. Some sort of light and humorous character or group ensemble with a happy or cheerful ending. It's dramatic work, and the central motif is just triumph over adverse circumstances. The flip side, obviously, is tragedy, where the protagonist is a villain who falls from grace, and in some respects, the very end of their death or their downfall ends up being a happy ending. And the seventh basic plot that Booker talks about is rebirth, where the protagonist is a villain or some otherwise unlikable character that redeems themselves over the course of the story. So that's nice. Those are the 7 patterns that Christopher Booker notices and sort of maps out and sees recurring throughout literature and throughout storytelling. But still, why? Why do we tell those 7 stories? Why are those the 7 stories that we tell? Well, he has a theory, and he puts it out, and I'll just sort of describe it here and do it as much justice as I can in a couple of slides. His theory is that it's the difference between humans and animals. He attributes this quote. This is not Booker. This is a long-standing quote that's been around and it's sort of an unattributed famous quote. That the difference between humans and animals is that we tell stories. And the fundamental truth of this is that all living things have instincts. Animals have instincts. Humans have instincts. Find food, reproduce, defend against aggressors. But humans have the gift of ego. The Pandora's box from which all human foibles came. Ego grants this ability to vividly envision the future. Ego also gives us this ability to vividly describe and relive the past or reimagine the past. Ego lets us go outside of time and space. Now, while these traits are differentiating, they don't take away our instinct as living creatures, as our subconscious's ability to invoke them. So Booker's theory is that when we tell stories as a way of expressing what's in our mind or what's in our ego, our subconscious projects certain survival instincts into the model. And these 7 basic plots are essentially survival instincts that our brain wires into the telling of a story that make this subconsciously happen without us even really thinking about it. These storytelling archetypes are like animal instincts. We follow these patterns in the same way that animals engage in certain behaviors, and these storytelling patterns are the emergence of our instincts, and it's really an attempt to bring the ego and instinct into balance. So this happens when we're talking about personal ego. It grants us the ability to sort of think forward, reimagine the past, learn lessons, and apply those towards a story about an individual or a person. But these are also where the collective ego of a team or a company or a software project, it gets derived from all those human contributors. And perhaps this is why storytelling is as a design requirement gathering tool is so effective. Ego grants our organizations the ability to consider and relive the past when telling about a user story. I don't want this to happen. Ego gives us the ability to envision a future condition that is yet to come. Here's where I want to go. The what and the why and the who. So telling system user stories on behalf of an organization, the fundamentals of agile development, still drives at that same issue around personal ego. And this I attribute to Andrew Stanton, who works at Pixar. He gave a talk where he said his fundamental description of what storytelling is all about is make me care. Those 3 words. If you make me care, that's telling a story. And this is a guy who made us all care about a clownfish in the Pacific Ocean. So I think he knows a little something about it. Roger Ebert has this quote attributed to him, and this is where it really starts to getting into IT and teamwork and why storytelling is so effective. Movies and stories that encourage empathy, and the word I sees on there is empathy, are really more effective than those that just objectify some distant problem. It's this sense of caring, of empathy for user requirements that drives this whole other level of collaboration. Empathy is essential. So empathy for user requirements and user demands and user stories drives good design. But then we've all seen, and a lot of us have read and talked about in the DevOps movement, empathy between the team that's developing and then the team that's supporting that software product also drives good collaboration. So if stories help to make us care, maybe that's why they're so powerful. And if storytelling is designed and tied to these common human instincts, then these archetypes that play out when an organization's ego is being projected. So what I wanted to talk to everybody here about today, and that's just a little bit of background, some of the research I did coming into it, because I really wanted to delve into what are the stories playing out across our industry. Not just trends, but what are the stories and how do they tie to some of these basic human instincts. So I've noticed 3 stories that we're starting to see really emerge, and they're playing out in different sectors at different layers, but they're fairly universal, and you see them playing out whether you're an IT organization that is serving your business, or whether you're a service provider, or whether you're a technology company that needs to figure out how to become a service provider. These stories, fairly derivative of some of the patterns that Booker talks about, are playing out in the industry today. So I'm going to tell you these 3 stories, and your mileage may vary. This may feel like I'm killing you over and over again. Maybe that's why I told the terrible golf story at the beginning, so all of these would seem somewhat better. So story number 1, the quest for modality, transforming how the business and IT get aligned together. So it's a quest story, story number 1. It's carrying the enterprise forward into this period of alignment and agility, much like a wagon train in How the West Was Won. Right, you get your big old lumbering wagons, and you get bringing the people and the gear and the supplies and the cooking and the construction supplies up in the rear, and then you've got the scouts and the fast-moving parts of the wagon train as well. In this first story, we really talk about how these different modes of IT innovation can coexist and arrive at the same destination. So we see this playing out. We've been surveying our customer base at CenturyLink in the IT space for years, and we're starting to see this whole idea. There used to be this 80-20 rule of 80% of the time was focused on legacy operations and 20% was sort of focused on new initiatives. In the last survey that we ran, this actually number is starting to tick up. It was up around 25, more like a 75-25 rule. In this latest survey that we ran with IDG, they came up with a statistic that about 25% of IT resources were being spent on these new initiatives that were either opening up a new revenue or opportunity or modernizing a new area of the business. In a lot of ways, this is like getting to watch A New Hope 25% of the time, but still being forced to watch The Phantom Menace 75% of the time. All right, there's one that landed. Thank God. So in reality, we see these successful organizations, though, they don't just look at this as a bimodal is a term that gets thrown around a lot, right? There's the new stuff and the old stuff. But a lot of people that look at this in the industry are talking about how it really isn't about bimodal. It's not the old stuff and the new stuff. You have to have, as a successful organization, a more progressive model, something that can actually facilitate that transition from the pioneering, cutting-edge kind of stuff all the way through to the long-term governance model. There's a writer named Simon Wardley. Some of you probably read his stuff. He has a blog called Gardeviance, and he talks a lot about this model, how this sort of tri-modal model or this progressive model. He calls it the pioneer settler. He actually calls it the pioneer settler and town planner model. I couldn't think of any good movies about a town planner, so I went with governor. But pioneers, settlers, and governors are taking these new and cutting-edge projects, but you have to figure out a way for them to actually get streamlined into the business for those cutting-edge projects to not become calcified or frozen or off to the side. Organizations that take bimodal way too liberally end up getting out of balance in some respect, or they create conflict within their own organization. The thing is, all these people need to be smart people. They all need to be creative and talented, and they all need to be focused in the movies and the characters and the stories we tell literally about pioneers, settlers, and governors, as well as in an IT context. Pioneers are smart people. Right? They can explore uncharted territory, and they can open up and discover unencumbered designs. Settlers, they have to be smart people as well. They have to turn this half-baked thing that the pioneer brought to them into something that can actually be appealing to a larger audience. And governors need to be smart people as well. They're able to take something useful and then industrialize it, in Wardley's term, discovering how to achieve these economies of scale and really building scale out of it so that it can take off. This model, this sort of tri-modal model, can play out, and it's been called other things as well. Mark Stevens is a writer who has that same kind of idea that it's really all around. He calls it commandos, infantry, and police. And are you thinking about your quest for multi-modality? Are you thinking about it just in terms of both ends of the spectrum, or are you actually building a model that can actually transition it into a state that can scale? The overriding thinking here is that multimodal thinking is about transition and evolution, every bit as much as it is about focus and creativity. So technical and procedural connectivity between these multiple modes of operation is important no matter how you think about it. And so the question becomes, how do you create connectivity? How do you actually create the path upon which your wagon train will follow in its quest? And so this important transitionary setting that we see, this new entrant into a lot of these quest stories, is the idea of a platform or a platform strategy, or every organization that is on this quest towards multiple modes of legacy and then innovative thinking are thinking about what is our platform strategy. Now, IT's platform can either be designed for this multimodal quest, or it can be designed on a project-by-project basis, but that's where many companies on their quest realize that for IT to really become a business agility platform, it needs to support all these multiple modes and be the connective fabric between them. So it's part of IT's quest to develop a platform strategy that works for their journey. And you'll hear a lot about this over the course of the week. There's organizations that are talking about building a private cloud, talk about working on a hybrid cloud strategy between what they have in-house and what they have long-term. What they're starting to realize is that it's easier to take something that already scales globally. Scale is an important issue on this quest. If it scales globally, it's a little easier to shrink it down and copy it and make it small than it is for something to start small and try to scale it globally. Introduce a whole new set of problems when you try to scale it out globally. So they're looking at all these different hybrid models between large scale and small scale. They're looking at models in their hybrid cloud and hybrid IT strategy to bring along on their quest, knowing that some things never die. You've got these legacy workloads that companies have to bring forward and carry along. These are workloads that won't go away for the foreseeable future. They need a strategy that can tie in both of these modes of operation. IT is realizing that for their platform strategy means that they have to have a yes-if kind of answer for all the workloads on this spectrum. So it needs discipline, but it needs to have a platform characteristic that can appeal to all three modes. So smart IT organizations are on this quest because they know they can't be thought of as the department of no. They need an evolved strategy where the IT estate is really a business agility platform. It means having their platform strategy identified. And so what do I mean by platform? So a platform should help a team do new things. It really needs to be available, and it needs to allow you to go into countries you can't go into. It needs to allow you to scale into types of time-based models, compete on a rapid, innovative process. It needs to allow you to embark on some of these cutting-edge type of models. A platform strategy needs to enable self-service. It doesn't need to be something that is so, based on, a few key individuals or something that you need to have a meeting to get started with. Self-service is vital for an IT organization to really consider themselves as having a platform strategy upon which they can base their quest. A platform needs to be well documented, not relying on a few key individuals that only them know how the actual system works. It needs to be something that you're not looking for a tribal knowledge of, run into the platform in between, at 9 3/4. Trust me, it's going to work. The documentation needs to give use case documentation. It needs to be geared for customer success and platform enablement. And this is an area near and dear to my heart. A platform strategy needs to give you a landing place to start working with a variety and a series of partners. It needs to be an attractive landing place that partners want to dock up to. You need to be able to work with your vendors and work with your different stakeholders so that they can all collaborate around the platform and not have it be something completely isolated that everything needs to be built from scratch. Fundamental definition of a platform strategy, and the platform strategy that all organizations on this quest for multimodality need, is that it makes your teams more effective. It makes a community of users, it makes a community of teams more effective regardless of where they're sitting on their quest. So the second story. It's more of a rags to riches story. And rags to riches is really all more geared at those that are providing services. But I don't just mean service providers. I mean a lot of IT organizations are themselves thought of as service providers to the business. At least good and effective IT organizations are thought of as service providers, and they hold themselves to that standard. So we're seeing a whole rags to riches story play out across the industry, in addition to the quest, where service models are evolving. So a lot of us have been in the industry for a while and have seen how service models have been delivered for decades, Right? Many IT services have their roots in this fundamental value proposition of this stuff is hard, I know how to do it, would you like me to do it again? And that fundamental service value proposition of, look, I'll cook you the meal, I'll do it right in front of you, here it is, everything's right out in front of you, would you like me to build the onion tower again? That's a 20-year-old plus service model, and it's been going on for a while, and there's still some valid applications for it. But over the past 10 to 15 years, we've started to see, and this evolved through the whole application service provider model into the modern era of cloud and software as a service, where this is a clear and present and a readily apparent service provider model in the industry of just getting what you want at the press of a button. I don't need to see you cook it in front of me. I don't really care where it came from. I'll press the button. If what I get looks reasonably like what I expected, we're good to go. And so you have basically these two ends of the service provider spectrum of I'm going to do it all in front of you versus press a button, and as long as you don't care how I made it, here it's going to appear to you instantaneously. And you've had a lot of the filling in between. And some of those filling in between efforts have gone very well and actually function very much like the press button get thing, infrastructure as a service. Great example. Some elements of the services that fill in between are a little bit more like 80s robot bringing you a tab, where it's, I'm trying to simulate this service as software, but it's there, but it's not quite there, it's not really ready yet. So this leads to that fundamental rags to riches story I think we're seeing across the industry, how fast service providers are getting creative at filling in all the services that are in the gap between the two spectrums of do-it-yourself versus completely software as a service. Modernizing a lot of these old service approaches, it really requires some rethinking, but at the end of the day, automation always wins. Automation will always win over headcount. Eventually, that automated user experience, if it's being driven in an agile model, will be able to anticipate those edge cases that we typically reserve for human instruction. And eventually, once you realize that press button, get thing, that value proposition gives you what you need and you learn to trust it, there's no going back to the old way. And so what you're seeing a lot of service providers, service organizations, again, whether they're in the cloud service industry, the systems integrator industry, the VAR industry, they're all realizing that the commoditization of this stuff is hard, would you like to watch me do it for you, or would you like me to do it again? The commoditization of that value proposition, it drives hard choices. Right? There's organizations that are changing their strategy. There's a shift in that fundamental value proposition. Service providers are looking at, do I exit certain parts of the business? Do I focus in certain parts of the industry? Do I focus on certain use cases? Do I move up the stack? Do I start adding more value at higher levels of service? Do I start to broaden out and expand my scope of service and try to be a little bit more automated, but a little bit less deep all the way across the board? Innovation in this service provider context means either moving up or moving out and then deciding where you want to play. A lot of IT organizations are actually playing that out and landing that in their own strategies. The final sort of trend I think we see playing out in this rags to riches story is that successful platform companies and successful companies that are actually executing against this rags to riches transition are using their platform, if they have an effective one, to build more platform. It's doubly important when you're a service provider to have your platform be contributing to your platform. It means being able to build and manage more services using what you already have. It's a little bit of a dark slide. Anybody see Big Hero 6? Great movie. Great STEM movie of using small things to build big things. Right? Features must not only be valuable in their own right, the individual nuclear service needs to be not only valuable in its own right, but you can be able to compose it together to create more things and more complex services. So in this quest for multi-mode, along with this evolution or rags to riches story around all the services that we're providing, they both feed together into the final story. And the third story that we see playing out across the industry is this overcoming the disruption monster. How innovation and how closely IT and technology and the business need to be aligned together in order to either fend off threats or become a threat. This new model for innovation and exploration of new opportunities. Now, everybody here knows that this is the Fantastic Four. This is the movie that they did several years ago with the Silver Surfer. The Silver Surfer was the herald from outer space who represented the big bad that you almost never see. That big bad is... Can't believe I have to explain the Marvel Universe at a tech conference. Guys, come on. But Galactus, right? Galactus is behind the scenes, right? Galactus is this interstellar entity that's eating planets and sucking their life force. He sends the Silver Surfer around to scope things out. Silver Surfer is kind of like a consultant to Galactus. Right? Get out there, find me a planet that's ripe for disruption. But don't worry, Galactus thinks he's in the right. Galactus is just disrupting, smashing things, crushing planets, much like we see massive disruption going on in the industry today. Uncaring, driving forward, sucking all the life force out of a particular industry, but then reapplying it and giving it back to the world. The quote there from Galactus in one of the comics is, "I'm right. No matter how many worlds I devour and how many civilizations I destroy, I'll give back to the universe infinitely more than I've taken from it." So you see a lot of these patterns playing out. Massive disruption, but then turning into an open source effort. Google, with their container management strategy and all the different industries that Google's disrupted, search, among many others, has given back, the intellectual property that turns into various other technologies like Cloud Foundry as a container management strategy. So you see all these patterns of just sweeping innovation going across the industry. Modern innovation, when leading to these truly unique user experiences, can be a disruptive force that generates tremendous value and sweeps across entire industries and forces other established companies to do radical change. You also see a lot of these organizations, in their A New Hope, 25% of their time slice, are able to use that innovation dividend to free up new resources. Companies like, Amazon's an incredibly apt example of this, from transforming their company from being a retail e-commerce shop to being an industry influencer in a variety of different factors. Nike taking their, what is essentially an apparel company and starting to embed sensors and starting to become more of a data company. John Deere following that same model, going from being a heavy equipment manufacturer into turning into something that is more of an agricultural data service provider. Totally new revenue opportunities that are adjacent to their business. Tesco, companies like Tesco, a UK grocery retailer, said instead of trying to go and duke it out in the grocery industry, we're just going to go take our grocery go-to-market model, our grocery technology model, and start applying it to other kind of goods in other categories that have nothing to do with groceries. Broadening out and branching out and using their disruptive forces to be able to try and drive that out. And this sort of ties into another area of storytelling. And it's this notion of wonder, of being able to do things for the first time and realizing that something was possible. And that's where a lot of those companies hit that moment where they said, I didn't know this type of business was adjacent to us, or this opportunity was even available to us, until somebody that's focusing on that next generation, that pioneering layer of their quest, realizes that this sort of capability is possible. Going back to the storytelling idea, think about the very first amazing storytelling experience you ever had. For me, little Dave Shacochis in the early 80s, watching the Star Wars trilogy the first time, right? My little mind was blown when I saw the snow speeders marching across Hoth. I had no idea you could tell stories like that. I didn't know you were allowed to tell stories like that. That's what you see playing out in the IT industry with different software models. Patrick Shanazon at the CF Summit, I was at his talk a few weeks ago, and he made this same point, that in 1995, people looked at Netscape and they said, I had no idea you could build applications like that. Had no idea that that was possible, what that technology opened up. What Docker is doing today. People are looking at Docker and what it actually finally allows you to do from a microservices and a packaging and a portability and a collaboration perspective. I had no idea you could use and build applications like that. So this is a sense of sort of storytelling wonder that opens up whole new areas for businesses to start looking at, either if they want to fend off a monster or become a monster in their particular industry. Adrian Cockcroft has I sort of stole this slide from him. He works at Battery Ventures now, and he was obviously at Netflix for a number of years, and it talks really about this sort of progressive, I had no idea sort of evolution, where we used to just think of everything based in a data center that deployed in a period of time and lived for a period of time. Virtual machines changed that way of thinking. This notion of wonder, of what could we do next, or what we could actually achieve, changed with virtual machines, and now it's changing again with these smaller and smaller containers and microservices that deploy in seconds and live for just a few minutes. So container management. Apologies, a bit of a reach here with container management. But kind of. But this idea that PaaS, platform as a service, and containerization, and using those smaller microservice-oriented containers is going to open up this next level of innovation. It's going to allow more software companies or very large companies to go and reinvest in those areas It's going to be one of the most fundamentally promising technologies we think we see as playing out in this third disruption monster kind of storytelling. It really is effective at driving agile programming, adaptive development, and discrete action against user stories. So your business agility platform needs to be firing on all cylinders, and you'll need to have mastery over some of these emerging technologies and models in order to continue on the quest to go on your rags to riches story, and then either fend off or become a disruptive monster in your own industry. So the last section here I'll wrap up with in the few minutes we have left is, what is our story? So I came here from CenturyLink. What am I doing here? What is our story? What are we up to? And we're actually seeing all three of these stories play out simultaneously across our customer base, across our product teams, and across our infrastructure and our legacy businesses. So we're an 85-year-old company, CenturyLink. We've had 2 CEOs in 85 years. We've evolved with the communications technology through multiple generations. So sweeping technological change is nothing new to us. And there's never really been a more exciting time than now. So our quest is that we're sort of one of these last telecommunications companies. Oh, are we live? What are we doing? I think I might have kicked the cable. Fingers crossed. All right. Are we there? There we go. So The Last Unicorn. Remember this movie? This is a Rankin Bass classic in the 80s, where the unicorn realizes that she's the last of her kind, and she goes to set out and find out what happened to all the other unicorns. Turns out that the villain had gathered them all up, and the unicorn goes and sets them all free. Turns out the villain in this story was Red Bull. So if you're looking for a business unicorn, Red Bull is your enemy. Take from that what you will. So we're embarking on a quest to really do the same kind of thing, to find out, okay, whether we're really the last one. But the more we look around at it, from a telecommunications and a networking and a bandwidth perspective, we're still one of the few companies that's really making this level of investment across our network and our cloud as a unified entity. Our vision is for a comprehensive automation platform that stretches across a control plane that goes from data center to network to edge. And our vision is that our platform should allow our customers and our teams to build new things. So if we want to be able to do something like deploy excess VoIP capacity to Southeast Asia, that's something that our cloud organization and our network organization are building together to the point where we have something new built from our platform that is a combined platform strategy that unifies it all together. So that's part of our quest. We're also undergoing in our service portfolio this rags to riches story, so this transformation, evolution story within our service portfolio. We're taking advantage of this pluggable, composable software platform that we have stretching across all of those global entities to create new services. So we're using our services, we're using our platform to create new services. We're actually launching services today using the key value storage service that we have, along with the Elastic Runtime service that we have, along with one of the other orchestration tools that we already have to create new services. So we're bonding together elements of our strategy and plugging them into a common architecture so that we can create new combinations of services together. And the final thing that we're doing is we're helping our customers overcome their monsters, and we're doing the same thing in our own industries, looking at disruption, by supporting a hybrid IT strategy that allows a myriad of different ways of applying our platform and our strategy together in order to evolve. Whether our customers are looking to either overcome a disruptive monster or whether they're looking to become one, they all are looking to enable new capabilities by leveraging a platform strategy and driving greater velocity in their innovation. And one of the things we hear a lot are customers asking us how we've gone and done what we've done, how we've gone and pivoted, how we've actually made our DevOps transition. Richard Seroter, a colleague of mine, whose voice is on the CenturyLink Cloud booth. He does a lot of our voice demos, is a very active public speaker as well. Richard gave a great talk about our whole DevOps transition, our DevOps journey at the OpenStack Summit. That's something you can find pretty easily if you search for OpenStack Summit Vancouver. It was just last month. But he really talks about this empathy model between development and operations and how that's been fundamental towards the actual execution on our end inside of our software development center. So customers who we're working with on this sort of disruption defense or disruption creation type of third story are coming out to our software development center a lot. And so there's another reason why I keep talking about this unifying theme of movies and storytelling. It plays a prominent role in our DevOps culture. This is a picture of our software development center in Bellevue, Washington. This is in the lunchroom. But being fans of movies and being fans of stories is part of who we are. It's actually part of how we talk to one another. It's part of how we communicate with one another. It's part of how we actually interview new candidates and assess cultural fit. Right, we name all the conference rooms after movie locations, and we have this is the lunchroom where there's all these quotes from movies that are in sort of different relief on the wall. And everybody contributes to what those movie quotes are going to be. So movies is a unifying theme that we use. Every manager asks a new candidate, what's your favorite movie and why? And it helps us understand a little bit about how they think and what their storytelling perspectives are like and what they hold valuable and what they don't. And it's more of a thought exercise, but there's really only one hard and fast rule. Anybody who says their favorite movie is the Notebook, the interview is finished. That's the only rule. So with that, I guess, why don't we call it, with that, I am finished. I want to thank everybody for listening. My name is Dave Shacochis with CenturyLink, and I appreciate your time.